Welcome to Storm Tracker, your eye on the storm of your Carolina Hurricanes, and your home for the best insight and analysis to keep you totally informed on what's happening with the Canes. Whether it's the latest news on the ice or off the ice, we've got you covered. Now let's begin. Here's your host, Tom Ray.
Well, the Carolina Hurricanes, after 20 years, have won their second Stanley Cup, defeating the Vegas Golden Knights in the Stanley Cup final in just 6 games. What an impressive performance it was, and what a tremendous accomplishment for the Canes organization, head coach Rod Brind'Amour, the players, and all the amazing fans who turned out in droves last week to celebrate the victory in Raleigh. It's great the Hurricanes just won the Cup, but what's next for the Canes? What moves do we expect them to make to get even better? And as the NHL pivots to trade and draft season, what major moves are happening around the league that could impact the Canes? Joining me to break it all down, Storm Tracker hockey savant, Aaron Manning. Hey, Aaron, how's it going?
Hi. Going pretty well, Tom.
Well, we're going to fly solo. As you know, Katie's on vacation, so Katie will return probably for the next episode, or we certainly hope she will when she gets back. And in the meantime, we'll do our best to try to cover up all these great stories. And of course, the big one, we haven't really talked about it yet on the podcast, is the Canes winning the Cup. And what an incredible thing. I was away. I was actually on a cruise, and I was watching the games with some other folks and cheering the Canes on. It was incredible, but a lot of storylines, right? And Aaron, what caught your attention?
Well, I think you got to start with the Carolina Hurricanes captain, Jordan Staal. I know I've been a critic of Staal's at times over the past few years on this podcast, but this was a time for him to shine. I really feel like his supremacy, especially in the final round, was key to them winning the Cup. And I think it kicked off, honestly, in round 1, game 1, with that fight with Brady Tkachuk. It was a silly thing for Brady Tkachuk to do, to drop the gloves with 37-year-old Jordan Staal, because once Staal took care of business in that game. And, I just think he never looked back. I think Rod used the phrase, it's our year, we weren't giving it up, and they really didn't. He was incredible in the final. He had 6 goals in the finals, which tied some records. Over the 19 games played, he had 8 goals and 4 assists. And he won the Conn Smythe. And there were some people that were a little bit shocked that it didn't go to a member of the Hall Stankoven Blake line because of how great they were in the playoffs. But I mean, which one of them would you pick? I think is the conundrum for the voters. They were kind of a unit, but when a 37-year-old captain steps up like he did in the final and becomes, those weren't just 6 random goals. Those were key goals at key moments that really drove the offense and kept the Canes in some games where it looked like they maybe weren't going to be victorious. And so that he deserved that 100%. And Nick Ehlers on the one side deserves a lot of credit, because I think that when you look at Staal's renaissance this year in terms of scoring, you can't ignore Ehlers' role in that. It's been huge. It's been pivotal. And then in the final, we had some line shuffling going on. So Seth Jarvis actually ended up back on what used to be called the dad's line. And he did a great job rounding out that line and bringing the defensive capability that he has. So it was just, I think that they caught my attention a lot in the final, and I couldn't be happier for Staal. What a great thing to do, to lead his team to victory and then be rewarded with the Conn Smythe trophy. So that was
well, we talked a lot through the season about, this is the year that maybe Staal and Freddie Anderson would have their chance to win a cup. They're running out of runway. And here they do it. And not only did they do it, they both played outstanding. And, Staal, as you say, is a beast. And he was incredible in the faceoff dot. Watching the broadcasts, Sean McDonough he couldn't believe it. He just keeps winning faceoffs. He wins them all. I thought that was great. But he was tremendous. And, the whole thing with Ehlers and the magic he has on that line, creating offense with whoever it is, and mostly Staal. Boy, I tell you, that really was something. And I'm excited about the possibility of this line actually staying together. I mean, we know Seth was not Seth. He was probably about 50 or 60%, and hopefully he'll get whatever's needed to sort out that shoulder problem. But he's a guy that, again, these are excellent players. And, Jordan started to show that he's got a little bit of an offensive touch still with it. And he made some beautiful goals and a number of plays that were critical. So kudos to him, deserving Conn Smythe winner. And, boy, I can't think of anyone I'd rather see lead the charge for the Hurricanes. So what a story. And, we talked about that second line. You mentioned them, the whatever line number you want to call them, Hall, Stankoven, and Blake. And what a story that is. That's just insane. Taylor Hall in 19 games had 19 points. Okay, now
wow.
He was plus 14, and I don't think a lot of folks have seen this. He was actually plus 14, which was the best in the playoffs for any player. I mean, this is insane, right? So not only was he driving the offense on that line, and he made so many plays that led to goals and scored some key ones himself, but he was also taking care of business defensively. And I think, this is a story that, boy, I tell you, we can look at this and look back on this. It's going to be incredible. And, boy, those two guys, Stankoven and Blake, man, we couldn't have written a story that said they would play this way in the playoffs this year.
No.
I mean, let's be honest, right? They're younger players. Stankoven really hadn't a full year in the NHL before, and Blake had one single season. And Stankoven, all he does is score 11 goals, and that's good enough for third in the playoffs. And all Blake does is get 13 assists, and that's good enough for third in the playoffs. I mean, that's incredible. So wasn't that something?
It really was. And I think that, going into the playoffs, we still had questions a little bit about whether that was going to work this way, because you never know with the physicality that can ramp up how smaller players are going to be able to handle that. Jackson Blake last season in the playoffs certainly did have some issues at times with some of the bigger, heavier guys coming at him. That was not the case this year. He did not back down at all. He was right in people's faces. I think we nearly had a fight at one point, so he was ready to scrap. And I think that attitude for all of them really kind of helped them too. And then just the way that they battled for those pucks, the way that they didn't give up on plays. They were able to do, to be the best versions of themselves. And for Taylor Hall, we saw that coming all season. But I think that the key for Stankoven and Blake is that they really did get hot at the right time, because they were up and down more in the season. There were some long periods of, kind of that scoring kind of went into a bit of a malaise, and they didn't have it coming together as much. But if you remember, the month of April, they really started to click and to look very good, and then they just carried that straight through into the playoffs. So, like a lot of people say with playoff hockey, it's not just about being great in the regular season. It's about getting hot at the right time and being able to then sustain that into the playoffs. And I think that they're an example of that line. That line is an example of doing that, and doing that the way that you want a line to do it in the playoffs.
Well, very true. And Logan Stankoven, he was smoking hot at the end of the season, as you say, carried it through. And the other thing with Logan, boy, you talk about playing bigger than size. Boy, he wrote the book on it. He was hitting people all over the place and getting, smashed here and there, and didn't seem to miss a beat. So I think our concerns, and they were justified, that smaller players in the playoffs, it can be tough. These guys did it extremely well. So it's a good
brilliant
story. And, one of the other stories was something you talk a lot about, Aaron, and that's first line Martinook.
Yes, and that was such a funny thing, because we all know over the years there's been a lot of fan groaning and complaining whenever the solution to the top line's woes is to put Martinook up there. He's been kind of a unofficial Canes babysitter over the years, as the younger guys were on that top line, and sometimes things weren't going well. But in this case, this was a totally different kind of move. This wasn't. I don't think Rod Brind'Amour put Martinook on the top line because Aho and Svech were having trouble scoring. He was happy with the work that those guys were doing to shut down Eichel's line, And,
Yes.
when you think about how difficult a job that is, that, that the fact that you might not be able to generate a bunch of scoring chances on top of that is not going to bother anybody as long as you're stifling their scoring chances. And they did
Right.
that extremely well. Eichel barely scored in these playoffs. I think the reason Martinook was put up there with Aho and Svechnikov was to provide a little bit of that extra energy because, as you said, Seth Jarvis was having a little bit of a harder time. We know that Jarvis usually is the energy guy and the defensive guy on that line and helping to facilitate those plays and get those pucks to the net. And he just wasn't able to do that. I think you're right about maybe something being going on there. So you put Martinook up there, and then all of a sudden, Aho and Svech, I believe it was Game 5, they just kind of took off, and they looked like the best version of themselves that we've seen in some of those comeback victories that the Canes have had, those exciting ones over the course of the year where all of a sudden it is Aho and Svechnikov leading the charge. So we needed that from them, and I think that scoring threat made it harder for the Vegas Golden Knights to ignore them. They have three lines they have to key in on because you've got Staal scoring like he's 17 years old. You've got Aho and Svechnikov back in the game, and then you've got the line that just doesn't quit, the Energizer Bunny line, if you want to call them that. Of Hall, Stankoven, and Blake. So they didn't have the chance to generate, to get the good matchups even on their own ice. And we saw that in Game 6 very much so, and that was an incredible game to watch. So it was all really good coaching and really good moves that were being made all throughout that series. And I think that's the most encouraging thing that we can say, really, is that it wasn't about, at that point, it was about what do we need to do to win, and putting Martinook on that top line is what they needed to do to win.
But, we look at the D-core, and there was kind of an evolution on the D-core because the K'Andre Miller and Sean Walker duo actually became the go-to duo for the Canes. That's interesting. And, we're used to, of course, Jacob Slavin handling that heavy lifting part of the D-core work significantly, but they really gave Miller and Walker a chance to shine. They ended up with a combined plus 23. What did you see with those guys?
Well, I think that their speed was an incredibly important part of what they were able to do on the ice. Both of those guys are very fast skaters, and then you've got, I think Sean Walker's physicality takes players by surprise at times because you don't expect it from a player of his stature. He's not one of those big guys that you expect to be throwing his weight around, but he has been really consistently for the Canes one of the most physical defensemen on the team. Yeah. And that did not let up against Vegas. And you can't because, we all know that that's one of those areas where Vegas can be very difficult to deal with. But the combination of physicality and speed and skill from that pair was, I think incredible to watch. And just, I'm not sure that Tortorella and the coaching staff had enough of an idea going into that series that was going to be such a hard pair to deal with on their end and that they were going to be so disruptive. Miller's stick work is still really incredible. I think that's where he reminds me the most of Jacob Slavin too, is the fact that, he is able to he has such a long reach. He gets that stick into the passing lanes. He's able to disrupt everything that the other side is trying to do. And it's just really fun to watch because he's also so fast getting back there and getting to those pucks. So, and I think that having somebody like that, having a pairing like that, given that Jacob Slavin has had a more difficult year this year, was so crucial for the Canes to get where they did and then get through the playoffs the way that they did and then win the cup. I did find it encouraging. I thought that Slavin started looking a lot more like himself in games 4 through 6 was when I really started to see that kind of come together. It's just a reminder, I think, that when you're returning from a difficult injury and then, it's interrupted, your recovery process is interrupted by this little thing called the Olympics. So, I think that we will see Jacob Slavin at the top of his game with no issues whatsoever next year. But having two players like that who can impact the game that way, it's almost not fair for other teams for the Canes to have both Slavin and Miller. It really is, because they're so similar in so many ways, and the areas where they are different, they each complement each other's skill really well. So Slavin with Chatfield, Miller with Walker, they just you can just count on them being able to frustrate and stymie the other team's offense as much as they can, and that's a huge story of the victory.
Okay, one last thing we'll spend a couple of minutes on, then we'll start talking about what's going on the streets these days. Brandon Bussi, we talked a lot about him during the season. He was incredible. I'm just delighted that the Canes made a decision to, give him a chance to come into the playoffs. We talked a lot about this before. We felt that it's important that the Canes play another goaltender throughout the playoffs, just in case. And in Bussi's case, he didn't get that, and he had to come in at the 11th hour in the biggest stage of NHL hockey, which is the Stanley Cup Finals. And all he did was accord himself extremely well.
He did. I think he had a 3-1-0 win rate. 1.60 goals against average and 931 save percentage. That's not bad work for 4 games. And yes, I know, small sample size, but these are the most important games. Like you said, this is the kind of sample size you want. And getting a shutout, that's just incredible too. So, and then I think, like you said, we've talked about this a little bit, but, and I believe it was Walt Ruff who mentioned it the other day on Twitter, Paul Schoenfelder's role in making these important calls. That if there's anything that has changed a little bit this year, and this happened during the regular season as well, there was a time when the question was, do we pull? I believe it was Freddie, and the call said was no, you don't need to. He's going to be fine, and he was. And in this situation, as we now know, we didn't know it at the time, but Freddie did suffer some sort of an injury to his lower body in Game 2.
Okay.
We don't know exactly what it is, or what. It's probably not something that's going to be too significant, but it was enough of an injury that it was impacting his performance. So that's where the call came out in Game 3 for Bussi to come in relief, and that is why Bussi remained in for the final games. That's the kind of call that I think in the past, if it was down to Rod personally, he hates to sit his veterans. He hates to take that away from someone. Yeah. You've played all the way through. You've been the guy for all these games in the playoffs up until this game of the Stanley Cup final when we don't even know how many games are left. It's hard. It's hard to let your emotions rule in those moments. And I think that is, if there's one thing that when they talk about Rod, they say he's a player's coach. He understands how players feel about these things. You don't want to be pulled. You don't want to have to say, I can't go. So having the goalie coach be the guy to make those calls, you can't argue with that. If you're the player, you know that he wants what's best for you and he wants what's best for the team. And so Bussi coming in and then just cool as a cucumber right off the bat. Didn't feel like he had missed a beat from the regular season. He was ready to go, and it was just a joy to watch him. It is so hard to come in cold like that, and then so hard when you have a team that stifles so many shots.
Yeah.
He didn't have to work real hard. But when he did, they were always high danger chances. So that's what you love about Bussi, is that he gives you those saves. He stops those goals that he has to. And he was fantastic. And what a story for him. I mean, what a story.
Well, and you got to laugh about the situation with Mary. We saw her frequently in the crowd, and of course, they're getting married this summer. So that's a great story. And he's got a new contract, of course, and he's definitely a key part of the future for the Hurricanes right now, I think, in the goaltending side. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So that's a wrap for the season. Boy, we covered a lot this year, and it's a little bit surreal to say that we won the cup. But, how do the Canes get better? That's a kind of a tough one. There's a lot of folks out there saying, hey, don't touch them. like leave them alone, right? Like, what are you talking about? But, I think if we look at history, it tells you can't be stagnant. And we're all of a sudden seeing some madness out there that we didn't think we'd see at this stage. And for sure, we'll talk about that. But I wanted to mention as we go into this, and I've talked about this an awful lot this year, and that's Eric Tulsky's work. Mm-hmm. He has done, him and his team of folks that support him have done such a great job. And I mean, last summer, just to put it in perspective, the two big deals they did were to get Nikolaj Ehlers signed up and then acquire K-Andre Miller. And let's think about what they meant for the Canes winning the Stanley Cup. They were huge elements of it. So, kudos to Eric and his staff for getting the right players. And of course, we had talked previously about how he tried to rebuild the Canes when they had that disastrous free agent situation in 24. up against the cap and losing a lot of excellent players. And, of course, some of those guys have been key for the Canes. I mean, Shane Gostisbehere, he had a tremendous playoff. Sean Walker, we just talked about. I mean, Carrier and Robbins been on the fourth line. These are all guys that made a difference and helped the Canes win the Cup. So what do we think Eric's going to plan? And we'll talk a little bit about that because I'm sure he's busy with his discussions. But first up is the NHL draft. And, there's trade talks going on, and we'll talk a little bit about the trade talks going on. But I wanted to spend a few minutes and talk about a few of the players that the Canes might look at. And I guess the first thing I'll ask you before I do that, Aaron, is will the Canes use pick 31? Are they going to take that first-round pick, or what are they going to do?
The overwhelming history of the Canes is that they will trade that pick. That doesn't mean that they will. If there's a player they really like in the first round, and one of the interesting things that we've seen from all this frenzy, like you said, that we're going to talk about in a minute, teams are trading picks. They're trading high picks. They're trading high picks for players and help right now. Usually, typically, when that's the case, it points to a draft that may be on the weaker side. There may not be as many guys after the top few that get picked up, and even the top few guys may not be the guys that they may or may not pan out to be superstars. You're probably not looking at someone like a Macklin Celebrini in this year's draft. You're not looking at those caliber of players. Now, anybody could end up developing into something more than is expected. But the fact that so many NHL GMs right now are willing to trade high picks is an indication that this draft probably doesn't have a lot of those stellar candidates. Will the Canes use pick 31? If a player that they personally in-house believe has the ability to be a great Canes player, and that player does not get selected in the first round, then I would see that they would go for it. Otherwise, they will do what they have always done. They will trade the pick because they don't have very many picks in this year's draft. They need more draft capital. So I don't see them keeping it unless they just have an internal candidate that they know they want. So, and you would know more than I would about who that might be.
Well, let's spend a few minutes on this, but you mentioned something which I think is critical. They only have 4 draft picks right now. This is rare. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Canes usually have lots of draft picks, and then they parlay them into more. So they have their first-round pick at 31, and then they don't have a pick until the 4th round, and then they have 2 6th-round picks. So they're in a situation where this is going to be a very slight draft for them unless they make some moves. And there could be some other things we'll talk about that might shore that up. But as we sit today, that's where they are. So some of the players that I think fit in that mold of they could be at 31, they could move to the 2nd round. There's a lot of gyrations around where these players are going to end up. So let's talk about a couple of them. Casey Mutrin is one, 6'2", 190-pound center. He's in the U.S. under-18 program. He's a guy that a lot of folks like. Adam Kimmelman of NHL.com said he plays the way the Hurricanes like to play, quick, aggressive on the forecheck, strong on one-on-one battles, and has a high hockey IQ. He's got a power forward build that he can continue to develop next season when he plays at Boston College. So Adam Kimmelman of NHL.com thinks he's a good fit for the Hurricanes. Tony Ferrari of the Hockey News said there's so much more to Mutrin's game than what his stat sheet says. He's a physical beast who brings a true power forward style to the ice. So he's a bigger guy, can skate, can do a lot of good things. So he's of interest. Tommy Blale is another one, 6 feet, 170 pounds, right-hand shot defenseman with Moncton in the QMJHL. Stephen Ellis of Daily Faceoff says Blale is a highly skilled two-way defender who came out of nowhere to register 81 points as a QMJHL rookie. He's exceptionally crafty, skates very well, and doesn't let bigger competition bother him. Scott Wheeler, the Athletic, says the game is defined by his effortless mobility. So another guy he's a good mobile defenseman. I don't think the Canes will take a defenseman too early, so they might get him in the 2nd round. Jonas Lagerberg-Hone, this is Corey Proman's pick for the Canes. All these folks I'm talking about have been selected by different folks to be on the Canes. Pick at 31. Proman says he's a tall, fast winger with a great shot. His game lacks east-west playmaking, but he has good hands and can beat opponents with skill. He works hard enough, although he's not overly physical. 6'2", 190-pounder. He played in the under-20 league in Sweden last year, right wing. He was out quite a bit last year, and what I'm hearing about this young man is that he could be a player that moves up in the first round. So he could be of interest to the Canes. Marcus Nordmark, NHLDraft.com and Sporting News picked him. Right wing, left wing guy, 6'1", 183 pounds. He's a Swedish guy. He's playing in the Junior 20 League. And Jason Bakala of Sportsnet said Nordmark could be one of the disruptors in the first round of the draft. He brings a combination of size, speed, and willingness to make plays in traffic. And Sam Cosentino of Sportsnet also said Nordmark possesses top-notch puck handling ability. He's got deception in his game, and he can get pucks to the net with speed and accuracy. So he sounds like a guy that could fit the Canes as well. Maxim Sokolovsky, this is Draft Prospects, and Sportsnet picked him to be 31 for the Canes. He's a monster defenseman, 6'8", 238 pounds, playing with London in the OHL. He's just a monster. The size and sheer upside of this player will see a team take a flyer late in the first round or whenever. The added comfort of a player coming out of London Knights program will also be key in this decision. So, again, another guy that's there. And finally, Juho Piipurinen. This is Tony Moriali with NHL.com. This guy, some other folks really liked. Again, he picked him at 31, 6'2", 203-pound defenseman playing with the Tappara Liiga in Finland. Scott Wheeler said he gaps and defends well. He moves well. He has a pro frame and game. His puck movement is clean and efficient. His reads are consistently sound. He projects as a really solid two-way D. Jason Bakala said Piipurinen isn't going to move the needle a great deal offensively, but he gets to pucks ahead of opponents most of the time, launches the attack via stick-to-stick outlets, and has the agility and vision to make subtle plays in the offensive zone. So another guy that could make. And finally, Liam Ruck. And there's a number of Rucks in the draft. This is interesting. So Liam is one of them, 6 foot, 175-pound right winger with Medicine Hat. He had a big year last year. He had 104 points with the Hat, 45 goals. He led all draft eligibles with 45 goals, and that's good for 7th in the country. He's extremely dangerous around the net with a variety of quality shot choices at his disposal. That's Stephen Ellis of Daily Faceoff. Scott Wheeler said he's a right shot winger who has a good touch, a quick release, likes to go short side, and can pick his spots in the net. The scorer had picked him to be number 31. So that's just a number of players that, again, we may see one or none end up with the Canes. That once you get up to 25, even 20 and above, it could go anywhere. We've seen this before. We saw it last year with Ivan Ryabkin. He was expected to go in the first round. The Canes got him later in the second round, so that was great. So, again, will the Canes go with a Russian? Will they go with someone from, Sweden or Finland? Who knows? We'll end up seeing this. But I don't have particularly high expectations of the draft. Somebody could change that and we'll end up with a different situation. But starting next year again, the Canes have got all their draft picks pretty well. It's fantastic. They've got, in fact, extra draft picks over the next couple of years. So this is really the anomaly for them. And they've historically not been a team that trades their draft picks, for these deals. So, we'll have to see how it plays out. But they'll probably surprise us. Darren York and his crew doing the draft side usually do an outstanding job. So that's kind of fun. So let's move on to free agency. As we set up for that, just a quick kind of clearance on where the Canes are. Unrestricted free agents for the Hurricanes. We've got, of course, Freddie Anderson. We'll talk about him. Nicolas Deslauriers was one of the unrestricted free agents, and the deal was done, right?
That was great.
So we had Nicholas announced at the big Canes party celebration that he had a 2-year deal signed with the Canes, and we'll talk about him in a minute. Amir Miftakov is a Group 6. He's a UFA. I don't see him coming back. Noah Philp down in Chicago. Great season down there when he went down after he was picked up by the Canes on waivers from the Oilers. I would not be surprised and would be happy if Noah Philp was re-signed on a 2-way deal. he's a guy that can certainly help out on that fourth line center spot if need be. So, and he played extremely well down the run for the Wolves. He was outstanding. So, yeah, Mike Riley, don't see him coming back. Giovanni Smith, I don't see him coming back. A couple more guys with the Wolves. Josiah Slavin, I could see him re-upped to go to the Wolves. He's their captain and a veteran down there, so I see that. And Ryan Suzuki. Aaron, thoughts on Ryan?
Well, like you pointed out, he's he's also UFA, I believe.
Yeah.
And so I think it's going to depend on whether he wants to continue playing in Chicago, because certainly I don't see any reason that they wouldn't be glad to re-sign him if they could. I could see him deciding that he wants to sign elsewhere. I mean, he'd be a nice addition to the Laval Rocket, and then he would be in Montreal where his brother plays, so or near Montreal. But I do think that when a player reaches this age and they're still, pretty much an AHL player, that they're probably not looking at an NHL, kind of career or anything like that. He hasn't had enough games in the NHL for us to expect that. I know some fans on the Canes would be disappointed to hear that, because there were a lot of people that were really happy when he was selected, in the draft, and thought that he was going to pan out. But he has been a great player for them. He's been very solid for the Wolves, and I think that whether he chooses to sign with them or whether he chooses to sign elsewhere, he's going to continue to have a really good career.
Yeah, and for sure. And you know what? He was tremendous, and of course he was on our Storm Tracker podcast, and we had a lot of fun with Ryan, and we sure hope he comes back, because we'd like to get him back on and have more conversations for sure. The other unrestricted free agent is Juuso Välimäki, and Juuso signed in Sweden. So he's gone on a 2-year deal over across the ocean. Now, there are a number of restricted free agents, a bunch of guys with Chicago. Not sure where they're going to end up. Skylar Brindamore is one of them. They would have to re-up him. I think they probably will. Dominic Vinsori, I fully expect he'll be back on a deal. Alexei Himasalmi, all these guys I think will return. Victor Neutsch, I'm not so sure. We'll have to see how that plays out, but he did a good job at the end of the year. Caden Primo, Justin Robidas, Ronan Seeley, all these guys will be signed, in my view. I don't see any question about that. Unless some of them are traded, I think they'll all be back with Chicago. Now, the big one on the RFA list, and we'll talk about him now, is Alexander Nikishin. So Nikishin is his contract is up. He needs to be signed, and there's a lot of discussion as to what should happen with Alexander Nikishin. What's going on?
Well, I know we've gone back and forth about whether he would, what kind of deal he would get, and if he's going to sign long term, and where the numbers would come in. But today, the topic of conversation on Twitter from several really reliable sources is that the Canes are actively taking inquiries about Nikishin. They're kind of trying to gauge, I think, his market value. And we don't know if that is a strategy right now to try to get those numbers for a long-term deal, or even a bridge deal to where it's realistic for both sides, because I think a lot of times you really have to see, well, what is the value of this piece in the market? It would be remiss for the Canes to not do their due diligence with this, since he is their one big RFA that would be a trade chip in a big deal. They're going to need to ask these questions and look into what would teams out there be willing to offer them for Nikishin. At the same time, I could just as easily see them coming back and saying, okay, well, we've gauged all that value. We've looked at the numbers. There's nothing we really want to get, or nothing we can realistically get for Nikishin. And at that point, they will probably go ahead and work out the details of that contract and get him signed long term. I know he's become a fan favorite in a relatively short amount of time. Everybody applauds when he lays one of those booming hits, and his shot is certainly incredible. That absolutely lethal shot of 90 plus miles an hour. So it's going to depend on how the Canes see him fitting in long term and what role they think he's going to play for them. I think the way that I put it just a little bit ago is that I think that on any other team, or many other teams right now, not every team in the league, but many teams right now in the league, Alexander Nikishin could already be a top 4 defenseman.
For sure.
So the question for the Canes is, do they see him stepping forward and taking that role on in a reasonable amount of time, a year or two, or are they unsure about that? And they'll make that decision, I think, based on both what might be available out there and what they might think they might need going forward. Because like you said, you can't stagnate. We love the roster that won the Stanley Cup. That will always be a special roster for Canes fans, but that does not mean that every piece of that roster will remain even into next season. So it's going to be an interesting one. I think this is going to be interesting to watch, and it's going to tell us a lot about the relationship between the player and the team and what they see long term on both sides. Because, if he's not going to have that shot in the top 4 in a realistic amount of time, then he may not want to sign long term either,
right.
because
right.
He can be that somewhere in this league. So he's not a young rookie. He's 24 right now. He will be 25, I believe, in October. So
yes, later this year. Yes, correct. Mm-hmm.
So he's someone who they have to make these decisions a little bit faster than they might if he was a 22, 23-year-old defenseman. So it's going to be interesting to see. I was thinking this would be a sign and it would be no big deal and maybe it'd be a bridge, or if they decided to go long term, they'd get a little break on the price. Now it's looking like that may not be as easy of an assumption to make.
Well, and there were different times I thought they would have already signed him by now. So, there was no discussion. There was not really anything going on. And as we looked in the playoffs, his workload was lessened over time. And we know that, Rod Brindamore, he has a certain thing with players that he trusts. And I think Alex had some challenges getting that trust. And I think, we saw the outstanding career that Alex had in Russia, but, it doesn't necessarily translate to, the NHL. And it could be that his particular style of play, as you mentioned, may not translate to the Canes. And that's okay. That's fine. He's worth a lot if they do trade him. Gosh, maybe they trade him to San Jose for the 2nd overall pick. Who knows? There's lots of possibilities here. They could make any number of deals. And I think, on the other hand, they would do a bridge and it would be a short-term deal, maybe a couple of years, because I think his agent and he would want something where he could turn this around quickly. But it's turned out to be a bit of a story. And like you said before, I think a lot of us felt this would just get taken care of like everything else has. But the only other guy that sits out there is Freddie Anderson. And Freddie, of course, he had 3 outstanding series. He was incredible. Mm-hmm. And we don't want to take that away from him because he kind of, had a little bit of challenge in that final series. He was something else. And, the Canes are in an interesting position because they've got 2 goalies right now. If you look at Brandon Bussey and, of course, Pyotr Kochetkov, neither one of them has claimed a leading role as a goaltender. So they haven't been the go-to for a team in the NHL. So do you re-up Freddie on a short-term deal, team-friendly deal, or does he retire? Where does he go? What do you think happens with Fred?
Well, someone pointed out something to me that I honestly admit I hadn't been thinking about. And that is that Freddie just lost his agent in the tragic death of Claude Lemieux.
Right.
So the difficulty here is that, even if the Canes wanted to go ahead and have another feel-good moment and have him extend for a year, and announce that at the parade, it wasn't going to happen because he's going to have to get set up with, someone new. We don't know that if he's done that yet. Obviously, that's going to be something that will, take a little time. I think that I could see Freddie going home and thinking this over and deciding that he's done and he wants to retire. At the same time, I could see him signing a 1-year deal with the Canes. I don't really see him testing the market and trying to sign somewhere else. Why would you at this point? You've just won the Stanley Cup. He's not cup chasing, and he is, I believe, 36 or 37. I can't remember now.
36.
So, but so it's not something that he has to do if he's really done playing. But My gut instinct is that he will probably sign that team friendly 1 year and just come in and be part of the rotation and be a mentor figure to Bussy and Kochetkov. But that's all depending on whether the Canes actually take a wild swing at one of the goaltenders that's out there and available. I can't rule it out just yet. I can't say that it'll happen. On the other hand, we know that the Canes are not inclined to spend a lot of money on goaltenders, and I don't see them aggressively pursuing somebody that's going to cost them a lot against the cap. So I really feel like a 1 year deal for Freddie is the safe assumption.
Yeah, I don't see any world where they go after a Connor Hellebuck or somebody like that. I just don't see it because, the Canes game is not, and Rod has said this many times, they don't need the best goalie on the globe. They just need someone that can make the saves. And I think it's been proven. Their shot totals in so many of these games are so low, it's stupid. I mean, we saw a number of games where they had less than 10 shots in the first two periods. It was crazy, right? So I don't see that. I don't see that happening. Now, they're when we talk about free agency and players that are out there, I mean, this is an interesting situation, right? Okay, if you're going to do something for a goalie, one of the guys that's out there is Stuart Skinner. He had been with the Oilers in Pittsburgh. Is he a guy you can pick up cheap and have as a third goaltender? Sure. That's the kind of guy I think the Canes might consider. But where it gets interesting is on defense, because don't forget Rasmus Andersson is out there as a free agent who looks like he will be on July 1st, 29 years old, $4.5 million deal with Vegas and so on, and previously, of course, Calgary. Andersson was a guy that was potentially in the Canes' radar before. So if they were going to do a deal with Alexander Nikishin, would they go and sign a Rasmus Andersson? Okay, this becomes interesting. Right shot guy, veteran, pretty good player. Brings some offense. He had 17 goals last year. So, I see a guy like Andersson as one of the free agents that you might actually tilt at. There's not much. I mean, there's not a lot out there, as you know. Another guy that I saw was Kevin Stenlund with Utah, fourth line centerman. Okay, if the Canes want to shore up and have some cover on that fourth line, I'm still not totally sold on Mark Jankowski as the go-to guy all year. A guy like Stanley on a $2 million deal. He's 29. He's a big guy. He's 6'4". He's about 210. Great in the faceoff dot. Like he's one of the best in the league in the faceoff dot. Right shot guy. Again, another kind of depth piece. And those are the kind of guys that I think the Canes can probably look at. And there's other guys like Tolvanen and Ferrero and other guys that I don't necessarily see the Canes going for, but they're interesting free agents, I guess. Now, there's also possibilities of offer sheets. Okay, there's been a lot of rumor on X and other social media spots saying, hey, there's going to be some offer sheets coming out for some of these restricted free agents. Two of the guys that seem to be at the top of the list are Maverick Bourque with Dallas Stars. Of course, he was kind of the heir apparent to Logan Stankoven, because when Stankoven left, Bourque got a bigger role. Actually scored 20 plus goals this year. He had a pretty good season with Dallas. So he's a guy that's interesting. But the guy that I think would be really interesting is Pavel Dorofeyev, okay, with Vegas. Now, they expect he's going to get a $9 million deal, and if he did, it would be a first, second, and third in 2027 is what the cost would be to the Canes. And they can do that. They do have a first, second, and third next year. So how about getting a guy like Pavel Dorofeyev?
I don't know. I think, I know that we're talking about whether they should add somebody in the top six. Dorofeyev is certainly an interesting guy. I just think that Vegas matches most offer sheets that the Canes could afford to do. You start getting into those really expensive ones because, you remember the way offer sheets work is you overpay for the player.
Yeah.
You don't pay market value for the player. You're overpaying to get the player, and then you hope to negotiate a market value contract down the road. So I don't think that's a realistic offer sheet that the Canes could pull off. And I think that the Vegas is very much determined to sign Dorofeyev. So I don't see that one being realistic. And I'm going to go ahead and agree with you or disagree with you on one other player. I do not see Rasmus Andersson as being a good fit for the Canes at all.
Okay.
I really don't. I've been listening and paying attention to some of the Vegas Golden Knights post-game chatter among the fans, and they're rather disappointed with how he turned out, and some of them are actively hoping he won't, re-sign in Vegas because they don't really like the guy. So. I can see where, there were some moments when you felt like he took some shifts off here and there, and I understand their frustration with that. So those are the two I don't quite agree with you on, but I mean, I agree that Jordan Field would be a great ad, but I don't think we're going to get him. So
yeah, I totally agree. I don't think there's any way that he comes out of Vegas, but I thought it would be interesting to postulate that. But, when we talk about the Canes, though, and we look at the lineup for next year, one of the possibilities is your man Martinook on first line. If the Canes decided to keep Nikolaj Ehlers and Seth Jarvis with Jordan Staal, which I think would be great. That would give the Canes an outstanding line there. They've got the Junkyard Dogs, of course. Then they'd have Aho and Svechnikov, but they need a winger for those guys. Okay, and the question becomes, is it someone like Bradley Nadeau coming up? I don't think that's going to happen, which means the Canes would have to acquire a winger. Okay, mm-hmm. and this would allow them to move Martinook down to the fourth line. He can fill in, when folks are injured. He can move up and down the lineup. He's, and I think he's getting to the stage where they have to kind of expect he's going to be getting less ice time. So yeah. So if you take a look at that, I know one of the guys that's been bandied around, which would be an interesting one, is Matthew Knies.
Mm-hmm. I think Matthew Knies would be a great fit for the Canes in a lot of ways. I'm not 100% sold on his defensive work, so that would be something. But, Toronto has had its issues, so we'd have to see how that would work out. But certainly he's a power forward, pushes all those buttons. The cost to acquire him will be high.
Yes.
It does look as though Toronto, the latest reports out there are that Toronto is indeed actively seeking, the potential of moving him, but they're going to want a lot back. They're going to be wanting to look at, rebuild status type stuff. So I don't know if the Canes will pursue that given the cost. I do think that on a line opposite Andrei Svechnikov, it would be a lot of fun to watch a player like that for sure. You get a couple of big physical guys up on that top line. But yeah, he would, apart from Knies, given that, the Kyrie's already been moved, Alex Tuch is signing somewhere, you don't have a lot of big physical wingers. And the reason I would push for that type of winger as opposed to a smaller skilled winger is you want somebody ideally who can play on either Aho's line or that line with Stankoven and Blake as guys move around and get injured and so on. Without Taylor Hall on that line suddenly becomes very small with the options they have to put up there. So yes. If you're gonna add a winger, you're gonna want it to be one of these guys that's got a bit of heft to his game. So in that sense, Knies would fit.
Now, the other option for the Hurricanes, of course, is to start to look at shoring up at center ice. We talked about, the runway for Jordan Staal. Of course, he plays it darn well this year. You can't really think about that. But if that's the case, do the Canes start tilting at a centerman? And we know there's some centers out there. Dylan Larkin apparently is going to be available. Again, big cost. Elias Pettersson's back available. He's apparently they're willing to take back salary now, so that becomes a little bit more interesting. And, of course, the Canes have been talking with them about Pettersson, and that could be a spot where they could move Jesperi Kotkaniemi, and that brings up a question. What happens with Jesperi Kotkaniemi?
At this point, after watching some of the utterly insane deals that were made for players yesterday, I don't think there's any reason to expect that the Canes have to buy out Kotkaniemi. I believe that they can move him in a trade, and I don't, obviously we're not talking about a trade where they're going to get some kind of significant return. He could be part of a bigger trade because with, if you're having a package that's going somewhere, you might have, a team that would like to get a center back as part of that package. Or even if they were to just accept draft capital and they would trade him at the draft for some draft picks. But I don't think they're going to walk away with nothing because right now there are very few centers available. And you mentioned Larkin, and you mentioned Pettersson. And after that, the caliber of of centers available is these fourth line guys that, don't move the needle for teams. Kotkaniemi, if he recovers his usual form, is a third line center at worst. He's not a fourth line center. So as long as a team is, willing to look at the body of work with Kotkaniemi and not just this last season, which was clearly, a bad season for a lot of reasons that have nothing to do with hockey. I think that the Canes should be able to get something for Kotkaniemi, and they should be able to make a trade. They do have to make the decision by the end of the day on June 30th. June 30th at 5 p.m. is when the buyout window closes. By the time the next window opens, Kotkaniemi will be 26, and then it's a 1/3 buyout or 2/3 buyout instead of the 1/3 buyout that they have right now. That's the cheap buyout. So if they don't feel confident in their ability to move him, we will see that buyout happen. I don't think that's going to happen.
No, I agree. I don't see any world that Jesperi Kotkaniemi is bought out. And I think it's one of two things. I think he's either going to go in the next few days, like at the draft. I think he's going to be traded for a draft pick, and it could be a later round pick. It's fine. Or if they're going to use him as a piece in a bigger trade. So we'll have to see how that all plays out. I know when they talked about Elias Pettersson previously, Kotkaniemi was definitely part of the mix. So we'll see how that goes. But, we sit there right now, and what's been happening in the last few days is probably the craziest trade session I've seen in years. It's more active than the trade deadline. It's insane. I mean, we look at some of the deals that have been done. You mentioned, Alex Tuch has gone over to Washington in a deal with Buffalo for a third-round pick, and he signed a long-term deal at $10.5 million for 8 years. Jordan Kyrou goes over to Washington. They're going to be someone to watch. They traded McMichael and others to get Kyrou. So they've got Tuch and Kyrou now. That's going to help that hockey club a lot. The Senators made some moves. Of course, the big thing was, Brady Tkachuk heading down to Florida to play with his brother. And we understand in that deal that the Canes actually were one of the 4 teams that Brady had put on the list. And I'm just as happy that he was not they weren't at the top of the list. I'm just as happy to see him go to Florida. But the Senators, again, getting some picks and doing some things. So they're making some changes. And they were a tough team when the Canes played them, for sure. So they're going to try to improve. The Sabres, they've been busy. We saw the Tuch move. We saw a big deal that they made with Chicago, sending Bowen Byram and Jordan Greenway and getting the 4th overall pick in the draft from Chicago, plus Louis Crevier, who I thought was a pretty solid defenseman for Chicago last year. So I think the Sabres made a good move. And there's lots of discussion that they could move that pick, that 4th overall pick as well. So there's lots going on. The Flames got Simone Nemetz and Maxim Siplikov from New Jersey. So Nemetz finds a home. But again, big first-round picks, 2 of them. Going in that trade. I mean, we're seeing crazy moves with draft picks. What do you make of this?
Well, I think it comes back to what we talked about before, that this year's draft is probably a weaker draft. And, when you were talking about the Canes only having 4 picks in this year's draft, that kind of made sense to me from that perspective, too. I hadn't thought of it that way before, but the Canes would be acquiring draft capital left and right, and they have lots of ways to do that if this was a draft that they felt very keen on getting players. The fact that they have not done that, the fact that they've still got the exact same 4 picks they started, the year with, or, that they've traded away a lot of the other picks from this year's drafts in part of those deals to land some of the players you mentioned earlier that have been brought aboard over the last year and a half, 2 years. I mean, I don't think they see this as a draft that they need to be heavily involved with. And, if other teams around the league may be looking at Carolina and they're certainly trying to shore up because of us. I've never seen anything this crazy. I mean, other teams have won the Stanley Cup and business has continued as usual, but the Canes winning the Stanley Cup seems to have set up a frenzy among general managers to do these insane, deals. And so it's kind of been fun to watch. I think that this draft will probably end up being a kind of a weak draft. That doesn't mean that teams aren't going to get good players. That doesn't mean some of these young kids couldn't develop quite well. But I don't think you're going to see any instant stars or any celebrities coming out of this one. So I just think that the Canes are probably happy where they are and not, trying to gain a lot. And they could even throw in that 31st pick into a move if they're trying to make some moves. So it's going to be interesting to see. And, I just think that it's going to be fun to continue to watch over the summer. I don't know if it's the shorter season, the fact that the hockey season will resume in late September, that's got general managers. But I've really never seen anything like this. I've never seen, we're not even to free agency day. And I know free agency is a bit disappointing this year, but because so many players that would have been of interest have already re-signed with their original teams. So not having an interesting free agency, I thought this was going to be a dull summer, and it certainly hasn't started out that way. So it's going to be interesting to see what the Canes do.
And you look at some of the players that have been re-upped. I mean, the Oilers signed Connor Murphy and Jason Dickinson to 5-year deals. At pretty good ABs. Bobby McMahon's back with Seattle on a 6-year deal. So the players that are, I think, important to their teams are being signed quickly.
Yes.
I think it's going to continue with the trade discussions. I believe it's going to be that kind of a week where there's going to be a lot of moves. There'll be some players going, there'll be draft picks going, the whole thing. Because these teams are trying to figure out how do they catch up to the Canes. The Canes are the bar now, and they need to know what it's going to take to get there. And so you're going to see all kinds of moves to try to jockey into that position. And boy, this is exciting. For sure, I didn't expect much action.
I was having trouble putting my phone down to go to bed last night because I just kept seeing these things roll across the transom, so to speak, and it was just insane.
You walk away for a few minutes, come back and take a look at X, and there's another deal then.
It's like they traded who for what?
Yeah. So and they're big deals. These are not insignificant deals. These are some significant players for sure. Mm-hmm. And so there'll be more. Again, and there's even discussion at the top of the draft that's kind of interesting is there's a lot of conjecture who actually goes in the top 5 and where they go. There could be some jockeying there. A lot of folks thought Gavin McKenna was the de facto standard at number 1, but I'm seeing other folks who don't think he should be number 1. So it's going to be kind of interesting. But again, what are you thinking? Do you think anything happens with the Canes when we wrap up all that discussion?
I think that the way the Canes are positioned right now, nothing has to happen. I mean, nothing really has to happen. They can sign that team-friendly 1-year deal with Freddie Anderson. They can go ahead and extend Nikishin, and that can pretty much be it. I do think that they will probably move on from Kotkaniemi, and I think that in order to do that, if they're not making a big move for a top center, then they will probably shore up with a depth center, and there's plenty of those, available too. So those small moves might be all they do, and that would be fine. They're coming back with a team of Stanley Cup champions. But like you said, you don't want to stagnate. You look down the road. You're not looking at what do we need today, what do we need in September. You're looking, what do we need 2 years from now in September? Yes. Eric Tulsky is extremely good at playing that long game. We know that from the kind of moves that he made over the past few years to get them to this Stanley Cup moment. He's not going to do nothing if there's something to do that makes sense. He's also not going to do something just to do something, which is what I think we're seeing from some of these general managers. There's no way that Tulsky will make a stupid move and overpay for someone that isn't going to work out for the Canes. If he makes a move, it will be something that you can pretty much count on working out for the Canes.
Yeah, and he's shown that at the trade deadline last year. Yeah, he had cap space, he had assets, he had all kinds of things he could do, and he chose not to. And his response was, "Hey, the deals weren't there that I liked. Simple. It just didn't work for the Canes." So yeah, we'll see. I suspect something will happen with the Canes over the next week or two. They'll add some players, and whether they'll be major or not major is the question. But I do believe that Eric will make a couple of moves and continue to shore up the team as best he can. In any case, Aaron, great to talk about this stuff. And I know that when Katie gets back in the next week or two, we'll get a chance to take a look at what's happened with the Canes, and we'll be able to dissect the draft picks and the some of the moves they've made and, some of the other moves that are going on in the NHL. So it's always great fun. For those of you who've been watching or listening, of course, Aaron and I are delighted to spend time with us. If you like this episode, please press the like button. If you have comments or questions, please put those in the comment section. And if you want to be alerted of future episodes of Storm Tracker, please press the subscribe and the bell buttons, and we'll alert you just as soon as they're available. As always, we thank you so much for spending time with us and look forward to getting together with you real soon right here on Storm Tracker.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like, subscribe, and tell your friends for everything with the Canes you need. Storm Tracker.